this cluster that we're talking about, there's approximately 773 acres that comprises about 153 parcels, of which 119 of those are private parcels. There's a lot of little splinter pieces that are roadway pieces that are owned by some jurisdiction. Average private size of those parcels is 6.3 acres, and the number of homes on those parcels is 76. Both of these areas, these areas lie within either Spanish Fork or Salem's annexation policy declaration. There's a map there that shows you that. And there's a bunch of other maps. Through the process, we held two planning commission meetings, two public hearings, quite a robust hearings, quite a bit of participation from the public. There were a number of residents that were in favor of this, and there were some that were opposed. We've tried to capture those statements that were provided, both written and stated. I've provided some maps for you that kind of trying to show, give you a graphic representation of where those places exist. The Planning Commission kind of was wanting that process to see if they could kind of block things together to get a consensus. And as you can see from those maps, that was kind of hard to get to. Several people signed or expressed interest in both options, and so that kind of added to a little bit of the confusion there. As far as the actual application and staff's review of it, in reviewing it, staff feels that this does align with the county's intent and adopted policies as it relates to the preservation of agriculture. I think this is more consistent with that stated policy and goal. And so, staff's recommendation was to change that to the RA5 zone to be consistent with that goal and encourage residential development through the annexation or incorporation process. We found some situations where I think we've only had one where a developer actually had the opportunity to have access to a water system in the TR5 zone. They're kind of the same and developed in the county, and it took a number of years to get that annexed. That incentive is kind of lost there once they have that density. So, and the county gets stuck providing services in some of these more outlying areas. So, anyway, that's kind of just a brief summary. There's a lot of information there. Free to answer any questions you may have. I know there are maybe some residents here that maybe talk in either direction of this. This area in particular, I think, was a concern that was kind of initiated some of this process through approaching the county commission, so as it relates to the limitations in the RR5 zone.
Can I ask you a couple questions
Absolutely.
Before we have comments? Thanks for this. I know this is a lot of work. I read down through every single one of these, and I can see the confusion. Even those who wanted to switch their, from one side to the other side and back and forth, and a ton of misperception in a lot of cases too, from slaughterhouses to however they're going to be used. And so I appreciate trying to get out the information as much as possible so that everyone can kind of see what's actually truth and not just their perception of what's happening there. There was a couple things though that in the end I wanted to follow up with you on. In the minutes from the motion from the Planning Commission, there was some concern they had with, and I read this throughout all the threads, there was concerns of blanket, changes, right? Where it's all or nothing. And it seemed to me like the Planning Commission was trying to find some sort of balance in there. And at the end of the last Planning Commission, it seemed like they had a task in the sense of trying to find out where people wanted to be. Did they want to be in this zone or this zone, or did you go through that process to find out where people wanted to be in the sense of per parcel?
We did. That's a little tricky when you're trying to assign zoning, but that's what the Planning Commission wanted to gather, and so that was one of the reasons of the continuation from July to August, was to provide those members of the public that wanted to state their intent or their desires And then staff tried to capture those in the
Is that,
intervening
is that in the
time.
map, in the maps?
Yeah,
Is that where
yeah.
you tried to capture it?
Yes,
Okay, because I
yes.
was looking for a list. I was looking, I saw the
Yeah.
maps, but I saw maps where they wanted to be in this zone, and then there was some slivers of white, I guess, where they didn't express one way or the other.
Correct.
And
Right.
so I was trying to find a list.
Yeah, there should be some lists as part of your agendas as far as what people expressed. There was a petition that was submitted that, by those that were in favor of the RA5 zone.
Right.
But I couldn't do
And that
anything with
was
that
in-
petition, because it's usually signed, and I don't know where they're at, necessarily on the map.
Yeah.
Anyway, it was confusing for me to.
Yeah, that was, we tried to capture that in the maps. There's a set of 4 maps in your material there. They kind of broke up east and west side, so you can kind of have a little better identify where those parcels are. And then we've did 2 for the fors and 2 for the against. And as you can tell, they're very
Yeah.
scattered. There's
Right.
Right.
So, yeah, that process did try to capture that, and it got a little cumbersome, but.
And in reviewing that, the general consensus for change was what, from your perspective?
I think originally it was, I don't know if it was fairly split. I got the sense there was more that were in favor of the RA5 zone, and as we went through the process and tried to help dispel some of the misperceptions, those that had some concerns of being, of going to the RA5 zone, seemed to, once they understood it, would kind of gravitate towards in favor. We didn't see a lot kind of go the other way. There still do remain some that, for whatever reason, were against the change and some of the potential uses. I think that was expressed. Some, have maybe some desires to develop in the future, whether those, are really exist in the county or not. The zoning potentially could provide that, and so there was some concern to lose that option. So.
And it's hard because I've received feedback, but it's always such a smaller scale than the actual populace affected there. But my experience from the people that came to me was either support for the change to the RA5 or questioning what's the difference, and then when they understood the difference, were like, oh, okay, well, that kind of makes sense.
It's kind of the sense that staff got to.
Okay.
So maybe one more question, Bryce. At the end, again, there seemed to be some confusion on applications, and I think it was expressed by you or by Robert possibly, that that they wouldn't have to go through their own separate application, or it could be handled within the application that we have here. It kind of cut off. I mean, it's a summary, so you don't get necessarily everything that was being said.
Yeah.
So could you kind of step through that a little bit?
Sure, and it was confusing even then. There was some discussion about, well, could someone initiate this on their own? This was something that was referred through the county commission, and that's always an option. People can initiate this on their own. They could initiate this regardless of the outcome of what you decide, separate and independent. I think what the concern was some of the people were like, well, the planning commission did recommend a disapproval for it, and so some that were in favor were told that they could initiate their own application. There was some concern about the application fees, and because we had to start over and do all the noticing again. I think the discussion kind of gravitated towards, and the planning commission was kind of hinting around that even though there was a recommendation that the county can follow that, the county commission can follow that recommendation, go against that recommendation, or can do a portion of those parcels one way or the other. And so I think that was what was tried to be conveyed to them, that there's this intervening time and they told the members there at the meeting to provide that information to staff, and we'd forward that on. We only got a couple, and those have been included. But I think the point is that they could still, the county commission had the latitude to zone portions of the submitted property and not have to go through the whole process. That would be captured in this entire process, if that makes sense. And then anyone has the opportunity to start over after this. So. This is, I guess, somewhat similar to the rezone request we had on West Mountain, or some portions remained the same and some were changed.
Okay, I have additional questions for Bryce. I would anticipate there may be some who would wish to address this issue. We would open up for additional comment on regular agenda item 3 at this time. If you want to come forward and just please state your name for the record.
Morning. Dave Ovison, resident, in favor of moving to RA5. Just simply like to call out a couple of reminders and maybe a couple of clarifications from the zoning planning commission meeting. When they said, what we would hoped when they said we had to file our own petition to do it individually, that we could use the petition and do it as a group. On that petition, you have over 50 unique names of property owners, as opposed to less than 10 that don't want to move. You have over 50 that do. The reasons for that mainly are, we'd like to use our property in a manner that we want. Our agriculture, we have animals. We would like an outbuilding that exceeds 2,000 square foot on a 5-acre piece of land. That's less than 1%. Spanish Fork and Salem requirements are 10%. So we're limited that much more than a city for me to build a barn to keep my tractor in. 45% of the existing lots that have outbuildings are not compliant, roughly. What that means is they're either grandfathered in or people are building what they like. But what it really means is the current zoning and ordinance does not support how people live and how they want to use their property. There are 3 zones that kind of come up, the RA5, the RR5, the TR5. It seemed that in many cases they were 90% the same. There were just these weirdness or these uniqueness to each one of them, and no one could really understand why there needed to be 3. So the process was started, which one, if we were in the middle at RR5, which one better suited us. RA5 did. So I'd just like to point out that we've turned in a petition, over 50 unique names. RA5 seems to fit how we want to live, the things that we want to do with our property. Nobody's looking for high density in any great way. I don't think anybody's going to build a slaughter yard either tomorrow. So thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you. Any additional comment?
I actually have a piece of
Just come to, make sure you state your name for the record.
And Tram, I'm not opposed to it, but we have another text coming up, that text amendment that could solve some of this for someone like myself. I have a piece of property within this that lies in the RR5, which is smaller than 5 acres, which if it does get allotted over, and there were some others, I don't think they're here today that were there, but I think the biggest concern that you hear from him, and I'm 100% supportive of that, is the size of, outbuilding that you can put on it or animals that you can put on it in the R5 zone. That's what the biggest issue is, I think, with everybody that's here. Mine would be different on the other thing, and the text amendment for that's coming up shortly.
Okay,
But
thank you. Any additional comment? Yes. Come on.
Glenn Roberts, I'm a resident of the area. Thank you for your time and effort. I can tell you've done some homework looking at this. Just to clarify a couple of things, I don't know if you've got a map like this, and you can see all around us is RA5. We've been neighbors to RA5 for years and years. A couple of these people that have not signed the petition in favor are afraid of development. And the petition that they submitted to neighbors begins with the language, the RA5 zoning will allow commercial business growth and development to come in as your next door neighbors. And so some of these folks, like my next door neighbor, Sandra Baker, who raised her 9 kids there, and her husband died last year, so she's on about 6.5 acres by herself, completely overwhelmed, does not want a condo next to her, or multifamily housing. That's how she read that petition. So she would not sign in favor. And there are several other neighbors that had the same reaction. My point is changing this to RA5 is not going to change the nature and culture of that area. Nothing will change. Nobody will tell the difference driving down that road today or a year from now that it's now an RA5. There will be no change. The other point I want to make is that the river bottoms here it's under option to be purchased, and that option expires January 2021. Those developers are not going to let that option expire. And Spanish Fork City right now is looking for a way to develop this, and we received a letter last week in the mail from Spanish Fork City wanting our comments on how we want to be incorporated into the city. So within 3-4 years, 2 years maybe, we're going to be in the city, all this area. This is a short-term fix to allow some people to use their property the way the rest of us are already using it. The other point is, these folks out here on the east end of this, there's a couple of them, like Ryan, that have some specific, unique challenges if we go to RA5 for them. Jay Thomas is out here. He wants 3 lots. He's got enough land to do it, but if he goes to RA5, he's going to be limited in doing that, and it would affect what he wants to do. I would suggest to the commission that you just consider moving the zone on this west part and leaving the east part alone for now. Because again, in a couple of years, it's going to be part of the city anyway.
Well, so question for you, because I know you're familiar with it. The people on the east side that want 3 lots, there is a process to come and actually get that approved, even under that, at smaller lots.
Right, and they've got 2 approved now. They've got a subdivision recorded, but they haven't got the 3rd. So they could be, they're grandfathered in with the 2, but it's that 3rd one that Jay Thomas is worried about losing.
Yeah, see, to me, that, I wouldn't be concerned about that because, again, of the process and having I dealt with that process.
thought I read in
I
the
think
notes,
it's a
though.
frontage, is it a
Where's
frontage
Bryce?
issue, Bryce?
I thought I read in the notes that it was a frontage issue, but I didn't think you had any concerns about that. I mean, that happening.
Yes, that is true. So the RR5 zone does allow you to do a subdivision, a lot that has 5 acres on a well that has less than 250 feet of frontage, which the RA5 zone does not allow. And so in this case, he did get 2 lots platted through the process. He has one that's an agricultural remainder piece that would have to go through the process. I don't think he can get the 250 feet of width that would be required in the RA5 zone.
Well,
So-
unless they go through the Board of Adjustments and get a variance granted.
Yeah, and
right?
those, by state statute, those are a little tough to get.
Oh, so we got a state statute issue on that?
Yeah,
Okay.
So-
Now, that makes a difference.
So yeah, that, he could potentially lose, the ability to have a lot in the RA5 zone. That's kind of nature of rezones, you gain certain rights, you lose certain rights, so.
So I think that's a legitimate concern for some of those folks on the east end, and the variance is an option, but as a member of the Board of Adjustments, we have very, very little leeway in granting a variance. I mean, it's very difficult for us to do it, even though emotionally we want to. Ryan had a piece of property before us last week that I wanted, to me, we should give him the variance, but we just couldn't. So I'd propose that this part be moved to RA5 and maybe we leave this part alone. These are little islands. You got 7 or 8 islands like this out in the county. Some have been resolved already up in the Pleasant Grove area. We can pick off some of these right now as you go and resolve, I think, all the citizens' concerns.
So is this all under, and you would maybe know better as a landowner down there, I know Spanish Fork City started a study. Is this part of the study in that land with the annex? Because you mentioned that they're looking at what to do and things like that. Do you know if they've formally started a study and the landowners are participating in anything like that right now?
Yes, they have.
Okay.
Yeah, they have studied it, and Spanish Fork is looking to annex up to 8800 South, Salem comes up to 8800 South, and that's right where we are, on that bluff above the river bottom. It's a small little area, and, for example, I've got lots of barns and outbuildings, but they were built before the zone was made. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any additional comment? Seeing none, we'll close public comment and bring it up for any additional questions or thoughts from the commission.
Yes,
You know, I'm in favor of some transition here. I'm hesitant for some that are resistant to it, even those that maybe you're on the west side. You know, maybe there's a few in there, I'm not sure. I remember looking at the maps, kind of hard to tell for sure exactly where all those are at. I would actually be inclined probably to, and I know Bryce has been going through this list, but to leaving the ones that want to stay in RR5 in RR5, and then those who would like to transition to the RA5 to transition to the RA5. And if they don't express one way or the other, then they stay in the current zone they're in. That's kind of my thinking with what I'm seeing here. And it's so confusing at times, because like I said, they've been flipping back and forth a little bit here and there, depending on how much information we get. Maybe we'd give them a certain period of time in which they could do that, so that it wouldn't be sitting out there forever.
I have no problem with that. Again, if it truly gets annexed, which the county's never most likely gonna fight, because it's not our general plan to keep land, it's to put them into the cities for services. I mean, I'm okay keeping it RR5 and RA5, because quite honestly, it's gonna change here in the next future anyway, so.
You know, I had the city come in and visit with me and talk about their plan and what I know, is there anybody here from Spanish Fork? I don't see anybody. And of course, they're concerned about what's gonna happen here, and rightfully so. And as we have these areas in which we touch, and we're gonna see more and more of this happening, we need to work with the cities as much as possible on that transition. I know that the cities are really nervous about the TR5 zone. They expressed that to me. But in this case, we're not doing anything with the TR5 zone. We'd be leaving people as they are, or moving it to an RA5, which they didn't seem to have any problems with the RA5.
And Spanish Fork, in their study and their work of development of this area, want to make sure that they keep some agricultural rural feel to it, so
Yeah,
the RA5 zone fits with their broader vision of the area.
yeah, the conversation I had with them was more or less wanting to make sure they weren't cut off from potential transportation, depending on how the area works in the future, making sure it works for everybody to get everybody in and out safely and those kind of things. So I hope that's really where they're headed.
Okay,
Well,
entertain.
Commissioner Lee, because of the way you were talking about that, do you want to go ahead and make the motion so I can?
Yeah, I'll make a motion. And Bryce, help me with the language on it so I'll discuss it, and then we'll get it so that it makes sense, and later on we don't have to fix it again, right? So the thought is that those who are in the RR5, that's the one we're talking about now, if the landowners would like to switch to the RA5, they have that option to do so. And maybe we'll put a period of time in there. I don't know what that period of time would be, because I'm sure you'd like to contact them and let them know of the option. If they don't contact within that period of time, then if they want to come back, or they'd be in the RR5 zone, they'd be left in the RR5. And then later on, if they wanted to change, they'd have to come on their own on an individual basis and submit an application, for change.
A question for procedural point, because does this perhaps make it easier if we move it to the RA5 zone with the 30-day window for anyone wishing to remain in the RR5 to simply make a statement, and then they would be withheld from the change?
Yeah, the only
It's 'cause
reason
if
why I
we send out
hesitate,
that notification, and then,
yeah,
and if there's an issue, then they would be able
They
to
pull it
withhold
back.
from it, and then otherwise
So,
it just shifts to.
Are you
the-
saying
just
that
gonna-
on the ones that haven't stated already, or are you saying blanket? Because on the ones that have stated,
And
they may
that's
assume
why
that they've stated.
that's kind of why I'm asking it as a question, just
Sure.
and a suggestion. If
See
they've
that.
clearly stated it already, would we go ahead and automatically withhold them and give the option, or would it be cleaner from your staff standpoint if they had to restate it? That's kind of why I said it as a suggestion.
I'll
or
just
question.
throw this out. As I'm reading down through this, there's a lot of emotion attached to these, and people talking about neighbors and so forth, and some saying that I'm not gonna I don't wanna sign one way or the other because I'm nervous about friendships. So I don't know which way would be the cleanest to put it in.
And that's why
To
I'm.
automatically take
Right.
it the RA5
That's
or
why I
take the
think for
RR5?
those who are undecided, if we make that decision and say you're in the RI5 with the change, unless you have a specific desire to withhold.
Yeah, and that could,
I think either way, I think the preference would be to have something from this date forward submitted, resubmitted with maybe a signature, because we've
Right.
captured all these comments from the meetings that didn't necessarily sign anything. They just said, oh, I'm kind of against it, but, you know, it wasn't clear. And so we tried to ask for that at the end of the first meeting, and we didn't get a lot of response there. And so it'd be nice from an administrative standpoint to at least have kind of a clear line of, okay, from this point forward, please indicate by identifying your parcel and your.
So is it cleaner to put everybody in the RA5 and then those who want to withdraw from it come in and say, I mean, that's a deliberate action.
Yeah, I
Is
would
that
think so.
cleanest?
Yeah, I would think so. I think that would.
And so with a timeline, if we say October 12th, which is a Friday, 4 weeks, 4.5 weeks, does that give you guys enough time to gather that and say that? Because you wanted a finite time, right?
Sure,
Would-
yeah,
would-
absolutely.
So, and that would be the question, 30 or 60 days?
Yeah, and that is my question to you.
So I think what we would do is we'd have to send out notices again.
Have to send out
And
notice?
we'd-
So,
we're just
right,
give
so is
them-
30 days enough?
That should be. I mean, we have our list. We can generate.
I would tend to lean to 60.
Okay, 6 weeks, so let's go to October 26th.
And you, so would that be a continuance to have the final action at that date?
No, in
Or
other
have it
words,
today?
if I
Take
make a
action
motion to
today.
approve and move everybody to an RA5 zone, except for then you're reaching out to everybody that wants to withdraw. So you have a finite date where that whole area is RA5 unless the owner of that property declares they want to stay RR5, right?
Correct, by that date.
That's the date I'm
That
trying to
date.
give you.
By the date.
That way you didn't have to come back here.
It doesn't have
Yes.
to come back.
Yeah, and I
And
think,
then anything beyond that, they would have to individually come and be heard.
correct.
Perfect.
And we can create a notice that states that they need to
So
submit something
again,
in
is that
writing.
6.5 weeks enough?
Yes,
And that would be October 20.
October 26th, that way it's close of business on Friday, that full week.
Okay, so my motion then will be that we move, we change the zone from an RR5 to an RA5 in the parcels listed that are in your documentation. And with the notice that will go out to all the parcel owners, with an option if they would like to, on a written basis, to come back and change their status back to an RA5 by October 26th. If they do that, that will happen. If not, they will be in an RA5 zone.
File that request by that date will not be included in the zone change, and the
Okay.
zone change will be effective on that date for those who have not
So the
withdrawn.
effective date will be October 26th for either direction.
Well, it will be effective for everyone who has not signed a document.
Unless otherwise.
To
Yeah,
not be included.
Unless they, yes.
so what we'd do is we'd take the ordinance that we've drafted with the legal description of all the parcels. Right now, it's got everyone.
Right.
Then we'll eliminate those that we receive.
As they
written.
come in.
Yes. And
But
then-
we are going to reach out to them.
And we'll send a written.
So here would be
statement.
my request, because this sometimes happens, this is more a Board of Equalization type of request. Let's not just rely on the US Postal Service, let's make every effort to also reach out by phone, for those that we don't hear, potentially, just those noticing issues sometimes come back to bite
Yeah,
us.
we'll do our best.
Everything
I
we
think
can,
we'll-
sure.
We'll try and contact the main players that
Sure.
sometimes they know that they have better networks.
Right.
They can contact each other, so we'll do our best on that.
Okay, so are we clear, Renee? Okay, then I will second.
I have a motion and a second to approve the ordinance amendment to change the zoning to the RA5 zone from the RR5 zone with an effective date of October 26th, with the option for current landowners in that area to petition to remain in the RR5 zone before the stated date. All those,
Sorry, I didn't, interrupt. This is just a little technicality, but this does include a general plan amendment from residential to agriculture. too,
Yes.
so.
yes. Okay, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. That will carry 3-0. Next, we will look at regular agenda item number 4. This is to adopt or deny an ordinance to amend the Utah County zone map for inclusion of certain land in the natural overlay zone. And Brandon, please
Hey.
introduce this one.
Brandon Morrison, Community Development Staff. About a year ago, we brought forward a proposed, kind of a proposal to deal with some issues relative to the natural hazards overlay zone. It was essentially a proposal to define the term known natural hazard area, And it was an idea that would have kind of painted a broad stroke across properties. It would have essentially, with that definition, the original idea was to say, okay, if your property has been affected by a known hazard, then you're in the natural hazards overlay zone. After looking at that, we didn't feel super comfortable with it, and when we brought that to you, you recommended it to the Planning Commission for their consideration, and when we brought that forward, we mentioned that we would potentially revise it and try to refine it, and we did. What ultimately happened is we kind of we felt that the original idea was kind of it was painting too much of a broad stroke, and so what we did was we proposed an amendment to Section 512 of the Land Use Ordinance, which you approved around January 1st of this year. And then we brought forward a proposed rezone of just a portion of the Thistle area. The reason why this all came up was because we had a group or an individual inquiring about developing around the Thistle area. There was a comment received by or some kind of idea given to a gentleman in the health department that there was some consideration of up to 700 lots in that area. So that caused us a bit of concern, knowing that our natural hazards overlay zone doesn't go up in the canyon areas for the most part. I think up in the Provo Canyon, it does go up as far as Springdale, but it certainly didn't cover Thistle. So that was why this whole thing started in the first place. So you've approved an amendment to the natural hazards overlay zone that I think cleared up, made that section of the ordinance clear. But now what this is to say, okay, certain portions of the near Thistle will be included in the natural hazards overlay zone. That includes of course the well-known Thistle slide area, but it also includes the Schertz Canyon slide area, which I believe occurred in 1997. And I think there may have been some more recent activity in that area since then. So and then along with that, so you've got the two slide areas, and then you've got some land to the west. That land to the west, there's some dispute on that. Most of this property is actually owned by one property ownership group, the Ford family in Spanish Fork. They recently acquired it in June from another ownership group. I think a number of them are out of state, but so what happened is this proposed rezone went to the Planning Commission in December. It was continued to the March Planning Commission meeting this year. The reason for the continuance was to give the property owners some time to be able to gather. They felt that there was certain land that shouldn't be included in the natural hazards overlay zone, so they wanted some time to gather their own data to show that it wasn't land that should be included. So as of this date, we still haven't received that data. What happened is, you had December, it was considered by the Planning Commission that it got continued to March and then to June and then all the way to August. So it's been on multiple agendas. Ultimately in August, the Planning Commission acted to approve or recommend approval of this proposed rezone. And again, when I say rezone, there's an underlying zone that wouldn't change. This is just adding additional requirements, hazard requirements. And relative to the natural hazards overlay zone, it doesn't limit property owners' ability to develop. What it's doing is it says, okay, if you want to develop a home, an occupied structure, habitable structure, a critical facility like a police station or like the UDOT facility by Vivian Park. If you want to develop a subdivision, you have to submit a hazards report, and then if there's mitigation measures called for, you have to incorporate that into the development. And so that's the effect that the overlay zone has, and so that was kind of staff's proposal, was to put those additional requirements on this area that appeared to be to have some concern about hazards, and staff went through a process trying to find data to use for the purpose of establishing the rezone area. We found data from a 2010 map series and used that. It isn't a perfect data set. We recognize that. But we also feel it's usable data that points that we can use to say, okay, this area ought to be looked at a little closer when there's development proposals. And so that's what we feel is accomplished by this proposal. The Utah Geological Survey has been involved. We've talked with them. They were at the Planning Commission meeting. They're actually here today if you have any questions for them, and they're actually available to offer a brief presentation on landslides if you would like that. So
The landowners?
the Utah Geological Survey. And then I'm glad
Well, that's
you
in our
mentioned.
packet.
Yeah, what's that?
That's already on our agenda. There are pictures and stuff about that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. If you don't mind, if you don't mind, I'm gonna approach the bench and offer a statement from the landowners. They actually would like you to consider delaying this.
Is this the current landowners? Because I see the one from the former.
Yeah, this
So-
is from before that.
Here's my question on the letter that you gave us based on these landowners.
Mhm.
In reading this, in 1 year, we haven't been able to get with the landowners and the planning commission in a whole year.
That was our concern too. We feel like they've had sufficient time to get us data.
Okay.
Okay. Any additional questions for Brandon? All right. We would open this for any additional comment, if there are any who would wish to speak to this matter. All right, seeing none, we'll go ahead and bring it back up to the bench for discussion. Any thoughts on this one? For
No.
me, when we move into these sensitive areas, it always tends to make sense to go ahead and enact that for the safety mitigation practices, so.
And
As long
sometimes
as
it's not.
it's well documented.
Yeah, and sometimes it's not necessarily for the original owner or somebody that's doing it on a commercial basis to sell a
It's-
home. It's for
The future.
it's for somebody that comes in and says, "Oh, it's a nice, beautiful home," but they have no idea of
Exactly.
what's happened. So I tend to lean towards at least the acknowledgement. I like the fact that Brandon says it doesn't stop development, but it does allow for a process that they have to go through, which I think is appropriate because then it starts to be recorded so that people know what they're getting into. The one concern that I have is a broad stroke approach. I don't know, I mean, and this is what I don't know is how big of a broad stroke is that? Is that really applicable to all the land that's being considered in there? Or are there areas in which building would not necessarily need to have this, but now we've put it as a known hazardous area, and because we put it as a known hazardous area, they have to go through additional hoops that they normally would not have to if they can prove otherwise.
If I might speak, yeah, if we've given you a legal description to use to include that land in there, what would happen is any time a landowner proposed a home, a subdivision, a habitable structure, they would be subject to those requirements. What would happen is they'd need to submit a hazards assessment. So it's going to cost them some money, obviously, thousands of dollars. However, if the mitigation, so once they have that assessment, if the assessment says there's no mitigation measures necessary, then they don't have to do anything essentially. I mean, if they're doing a subdivision, they might have to put a couple notes on the plat saying, yeah, this land's in the hazard area. But if the assessment says no mitigation measures or there's none recommended, they don't have to do anything. But you're right, they would at least have to do an assessment.
Yeah. And I always
Hold on,
find it
Brandon.
interesting that we say here, known hazardous areas, and I think pretty much all of us live in a certain form of known hazardous areas, earthquakes, whatever.
What, fault line? Hey, quick question.
Sure.
This email that you just handed us, he asked for a short, I just lost the term, short time, a delay in a decision for a short time. is there any reason we have to do this? Like, to me, a short time is next commission meeting, period.
I'm not aware that
Is it time sensitive that if we were to continue it for a week, I am only curious to see, I mean, again, I think their objections may be potentially misunderstood on kind of why and what this is about.
Right.
But, I mean, I don't know.
It's not time, there's nothing pending within a week's time that's gonna affect us
Going forever
or
anyway.
any applications.
Just looking at it, I'm like, a short time, but
My personal inclinations to act, given that, I mean, this has been a fairly lengthy process.
If I may address this, Robert Moore, County Attorney's Office. Let me just address the broad brush issue here. The information that we've used to determine what area should be included is from the USGS, or the Utah Geological, UGS, yes. And their maps and their data that's been provided. That's my understanding here. So we're not just picking areas that we think might have slides. We're picking areas that have been identified as hazardous areas. And we do have some precedent of requiring some of these geological assessments. We did that with Box Elder South. I realize that may not necessarily be exactly the same, but we did do that with that subdivision. They did provide a geological hazard study. They had to, as a result of that, they had to produce, create some berms and other things to help mitigate some of those issues. So it's not without precedent. We have done that before with the county.
But we also know how long that process will take if somebody wants to pull it out of that and change it. I mean, down in Gunnison, they had some flood issues down there. They built a berm and everything. And, I mean, it's almost like it was baked in concrete. It was almost impossible to get them to move on that once we take a certain form of action. That's my concern about the broad brush approach.
And to further address that then, in this situation, actually, it's very, I don't want to say easy, but you go through and you have your hazard assessment done on that property. And in your property, and the engineer, the geological engineer looks at it and says, you don't need any mitigation. And then produces that for us, for documentation for us. They're done. Or if they do require some sort of mitigation, then they have to do the mitigation that's required in order for them to build that structure. But it's not a matter of changing the UGS data. It's a matter of producing a geotechnical, I may be saying it incorrectly. Yes, natural hazard assessment. And that assessment making a recommendation, and depending upon the situation, again, it's good because you want an individual parcel assessment
Right.
at this point. Because you really want to know what's going to happen on that parcel. And whether that home's going to move and people are going to die or not, or whether they're going to be damaged to the property. That's what you're looking for. And that's what this is here to help with. And to be honest with you, this is the area that we know of an existing slide, Thistle area that we're talking about today. There could be other areas that we bring in the future, but for now, we started with this one because we all know there's a slide in Thistle because it's happened there
Sure.
before.
Rob or
There's potential
Brandon,
development on that.
do we know if the previous owner or the current owner has hired or done any of those such studies?
Yeah, they have done them. Apparently, they made some efforts in the mid-90s to start considering developing that land, some of that land. And they did have a geotechnical firm involved. There was a guy named Steve that they had 20 years ago work with them. They tried to use him again, and I guess has some failing health. But yeah, they have had.
So the last study done on it was 95.
Right. And you saw the letter, there's a letter from Steve in your packet, and I think when I read it, it seemed like there needed to be some more clarity brought to, the letter seemed unclear.
Well, and
as to
that
it
was
an
really my
issue.
question. So hypothetically, we wait a week. Is that what they were gonna come and present, was one of those studies? It doesn't sound like
Yeah,
it.
they wanted time to come and get a new study prepared and show.
Right, so they want us to delay so that they can do a new study.
Correct.
Well, so here's the question. Even if we, going back to kind of what Commissioner Lee's saying with his broad brush, we approve it and do the overlay zone, can't they then do a study and bring it before the commission, and the commission can undo the action of the commission?
I'm sure that, yeah, they
Sure,
could
right.
rezone, yeah.
So,
They could carve it out.
They
Right.
could carve it out, yeah.
Isn't one of the areas that they're looking at, is that just, as you go up there and you go, past the slide, and then you start on the road and go down, it's right in that area?
You're talking on Highway 89?
Yeah.
There's a tiny little bit in there over by the gun range.
from
But
the north, where at?
It's kind of east, isn't it?
yeah, most of this area is more along US 6. The disputed area is a Schertz Canyon area, which is kind of closer to the covered bridge. So this is west of the Thistle Slide and west of Schertz Canyon. So think of the Spanish Fork River Park. It's just west of that area on the south side of the road.
Which interestingly enough, if you look geographically, there appears to be a historic slide there anyway,
Yeah, it's interesting.
just to the west of that area. It's a really nice green field now, but it looks like a historic slide.
Well, the geological surveys maps identify, the reason why that land's included in this proposal is because it's basically, well, one of the maps that they identified for us shows it being in a QMS geological unit, and that's, if you look in your packet, the QMS is kind of equates to landslides, so.
Okay, well, thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Again,
Ready
my
for a
personal
motion?
preference is to take a motion today on this.
Well, yeah, considering even though they requested that, considering they can always come back and bring the action for reconsideration, I see no reason not to, so I'll make a motion then that we adopt the ordinance as stated in number 4.
Second?
I have a motion and a second to adopt the ordinance as stated in regular agenda item number 4. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion will carry 3-0. We'll now look at regular agenda item number 5 to adopt or deny an ordinance to amend the Utah County Land Use Ordinance, subsection 1-6-J, related to non-conforming lots.
Okay.
Brandon, you're just a busy man today.
Back at it today. So you've heard from Ryan Schramm about a potential or a proposed text amendment. You've also heard from Mr. Roberts as well. This has kind of been ongoing for quite a while. Another thing that's been going on for about a year. We've had, and it's really just kind of a seemingly simple issue, but you've got a 4.99 acre lot in between Salem and Payson. The property owner would like to build a home on it, but he's running into two things. At 4.99 acres, he's a non-conforming lot of record, and he also, at 4.99 acres, doesn't qualify as, you have to have 5 acres to build in the RA5 zone. This property's in the RA5 zone. So he doesn't have enough to build in the RA5 zone, doesn't have enough to build a home, but he also, again, is a non-conforming lot of record. However, non-conforming lots of record are not eligible to receive building permits for homes in the RA5 zone. That zone was specifically excluded in section 16J of the land use ordinance. And as we looked at that, staff believes the purpose for excluding the RA5 zone is to limit the number of dwellings in an agricultural area of the county. The A1 zone at the time, I think the current zone, it went from the A1 to the RA5 zone. So that's our thought, but
So, Brandon,
yeah.
a couple months ago, we had a gentleman come in here and we sent him back to the Board of Adjustments.
This is that guy.
Okay,
So, yeah.
and so they couldn't approve, or we didn't ever get to the process where Board of Adjustments, is this where the state statute basically stopped them?
Yeah,
Okay.
that's exactly right. So it
Okay.
appears to be a statutory issue. It did
Okay,
go to
I'm
the
just
board
trying to
last
connect all the dots
Thursday.
from
Yeah.
those two different conversations, okay?
They received a denial for their request for a
Okay.
variance last week.
So if we change the text amendment, then we're still okay with state statute and they would be allowed to do what they originally were trying to do a variance on?
Correct.
Okay.
The one, staff does have a couple of concerns to bring to you if you choose to amend the text. We believe that there's a potential for about 200 or so lots to.
And that's my concern. Because quite honestly, here's how I really would like to handle this, and this is a horrible way to
100
govern.
or 600?
I
a lot.
apologize, that
Says
it
six.
started
Yeah,
out 600,
But-
but I did further research and it was less than what I originally indicated. It was quite a bit less,
So
so.
I don't know if there's a way, because technically if we pass something, he hurries and applies for a permit, even if we then change it back, he's grandfathered in, right? Do you see where I'm heading? That's how I'd like to really handle this because of the concern on the others and address them on a one-by-one basis, but.
It's interesting because he has neighbors that may be in the same boat as him, and that was one of the things that the Board of Adjustment was grappling with on Thursday night, was that there are a few others just like him.
See,
right in
the,
that
the
neighborhood.
problem I have is 4.9 versus 5, right? 5 was this arbitrary number picked years ago. That's the part that I struggle with. And then
Right.
the next part is you own property. It's a constitutionally mandated right of ownership. You should be able to do it as long as you're not causing harm or safety to others, so.
Right.
Whatever happened to the center line conversation that was going on? in
The
this
center
whole
line of the
thing?
road?
Yeah, center line of the road, because I think there was some discussion on if that center line was moved, then they'd be in compliance.
We received a survey from his engineer, and long story short, his property line isn't perpendicular with the right of way, and so on one end of on half of the right of way, his property's outside of it, but on the other side, on the other half, he ultimately would end up having he ends up having a portion of his land. Portion of his land ends up lying in the right of way. And so if he had to do a subdivision, he'd end up dedicating a portion of his land, and then he'd end up with even less than 4.99. So that was one of the that's one of the options he has, is to do a subdivision to make this property legal. And we feel like that's probably the best way to develop, to establish this as a dwelling site. The concern we have with the text amendment is it appears to potentially sidestep the subdivision process, which gives a county roadway, and it helps to clear the right of way and things like that, so.
So, I mean, besides doing a text amendment, which applies across the county and has its own little ramifications, is there an opportunity, maybe the landowner, is there an opportunity to buy a little sliver of property from a neighbor and getting conformance that way? Or are they in the same boat where they're like, I can't sell you anything, because if I do, then I'm gonna be I can't.
He has one or two neighbors that might be able to sell them land, although last week in the meeting, I guess you probably need to talk to the owner. Anyway, the owner appeared to not be super excited about selling his land. One of them, probably the best opportunity probably the best neighbor to give up land, suggested in the Board of Adjustment meeting that he wasn't super excited about selling
What's the
land.
objection to a subdivision? Because we create a subdivision he creates a subdivision on his land, he's obviously not required to build more than one dwelling.
Right. It's just a longer process for him.
Oh.
And you might ask him. That's my first
Well,
thought. Is it's just.
See, so the longer process, that I'm actually sympathetic to that, because he actually came here in June, end of May.
Yep.
And we sent him back through the other process, telling him, please go through that, and he did. So for me, I can feel for that.
Additional questions for you? Okay, we'd obviously like to open this up for additional comment, if there is any, which I anticipate. And again, to state your name for the record, please.
Ryan Schramm. Hey, first off, I wanted to thank you for that thought. That was spot on this morning. Hey, so I think the concern that I have, and I've discussed this with Brandon and Bryce a little bit about the subdivision, the problem with doing that is we have to give the county some of the property, which even makes our property smaller than 5 acres, which we have to meet to be there. And so we've been working on this for, like I say, for a year. We came before you about that. But what we've got here is just a sliver, and that's what the commission was struggling with. The variance the other day, we sat here for an hour and a half, almost 2 hours, hammering out, how do we figure this out? But they were held by that statute. My thought with it is right now, okay, you have a text amendment on the table that you can vote for. Either do it or not. You have the potential of 200 lots, properties within the county out there that it might affect, that could come get a permit. How many of those are gonna be here tomorrow to get a permit? I mean, it might be 20 years. If you did 10 a year, how big of an effect is it actually gonna be, you know, upon the county and what the plan is? The properties where we sat, that we looked the other night and there were 4 of them that were like this exact same amount of property. The property just to the east of us has 4.29, which he doesn't want to give up, not even that little bit, because then it takes him out of the agricultural zone. So, or the green belt. So then obviously his taxes would go up. So that's kind of where we're at, is if this text amendment goes through, then we do it. If we do have to subdivide, then we have to acquire more ground. Where are we going to acquire it? And because of the ground that we'll have to give up for the easement. But
See,
if you have
so the concern is though, it's not stopping you. That's not the concern. We're here to try and facilitate that. The concern is, and this is all the city's concerns every time they talk about annexation or things like that, when you build a one-off home, which again, I'm glad when people do, the problem is we create a transportation nightmare. So if we have a plan, which is their reason for the study, the reason why the county takes land for that is for safety, access of vehicles, emergency vehicles, snow plowing and things like that. And so that's the reason why when people subdivide, they do give up land, but you know, generally you're making it back because you're selling them. In some cases, you're keeping them in the family, but that's the only concern. That would be why I think there's some concern from staff and probably our public works director and things like that, because we've dealt with this a lot with people who want to subdivide and they're just like, well, I'm right here and I don't want to do this, and you know, well, so.
I don't know that we'd be able to subdivide it unless we acquired the land. The biggest thing, I mean, we've looked at the road. We would actually, the only thing that would be required to add would be 3 feet of asphalt. And you're driving down a country road.
Sure.
For 325 feet, there's an extra
And again, I'm not talking on your
lot.
lot. I'm talking about
Right.
the other 200. I think there's that potential concern that we get into. That's why we're struggling with the text amendment. It's not your particular lot.
Right.
It's all the others.
Right. Well, it's interesting that the text amendment itself allows all these other zones that are the same size, same requirements, but yet they can do it.
Sure.
You know, the RR5 can't. That's why I brought it up before, because I have a piece of property that's under that, which would allow for it. It's got some other restrictions that we'll work through, but that's what we're looking at.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Thank you.
Okay.
Additional comment?
Thank you, Glenn Roberts again. Just a perspective from, as a member of the Board of Adjustments, we received this petition last week and reviewed it, and wanted very badly to grant the variance because we thought this lot, it was entitled to it, but we were precluded from doing so because of state laws. And it seems to me with the text amendment, we would have that flexibility to do that on this lot. What we have to understand is the reason this property now is 4.9 or 4.99, depending on who you ask, is as this area came down in time, it was sections, half sections, quarter quarters, and that's all mathematically flat. And we start getting smaller, and they go out and survey it, and we got curvature of the earth. And now all of a sudden our parcels are smaller. And so from, I don't remember the streets, but you've got a county road here and a county road here, and everything in between ended up being less acreage than originally granted in the patents. It's just not there between the roads. And so the neighbors got together and divided it up and made it, you know, so it fit, but then everybody's got 4.9 acres now. So, and you live, you know, in a similar area, and you have that problem, and behind him, there's a piece that is not owned. It's a gap. It's there, people are using it, but it's not owned, and it's for the same reason. So I would support this
Not owned
text.
by even a government entity?
No. Well, you'd have to go back to the patent, to the original patent. So does this neighbor own it, or does this neighbor own it? I don't know. It's a strip of land that's not being taxed.
So here's a question for you, in relationship, what state code is particularly tying your hands on this one?
I'm not sure it's a code, but as I understand, talking
Or
to
statute?
council, it's
It is a
case
state
law.
statute.
Is it
Okay.
a state statute? Okay, but we have been advised that as a member of the Board of Adjustments, that it's a very, very rare circumstance we can grant a variance.
You need new
It's,
counsel.
it's state code that deals with requirements to grant a variance.
And I'm just trying to understand, as part of this process, if we can't loosen that to give you more flexibility.
Right.
Because my concern in this particular instance isn't this individual case. It's the can of worms that
Right.
it opens up that makes me extremely hesitant.
Right.
And so when I look at it and I go, is there a possibility? And if it is becoming so restrictive in silly cases like this, then it sounds to me like one of the things that needs to happen, irregardless of our decision today, is addressing this at a state level to try and give you some flexibility in those matters.
But it seems.
That's where it would have to happen.
Right, but it seems to me that if you grant the text amendment, then those issues come down to the Board of Adjustments, and we can look at these one by one as they're applied for.
No, I think they just go through.
No, Bryce says no.
Oh, they just,
Unless I'm misunderstanding.
no, they don't even come to you.
We wouldn't even get it?
That's correct. These would be
Automatic.
eligible for permits as a building
Oh,
lot. That's
okay.
substandard.
That's your concern.
Well,
And that's my concern.
Your concern.
so
Okay,
And then when we start to talk about, you know, water supply, we talk about septic systems in these areas. A lot of the areas that are RA5 zones are in high water table areas where septics,
right.
you know, become very concerning. And then when we start to dilute, you know, our groundwater supply and stuff like that, it just gets very concerning
Sure,
from a
understand,
public health
yeah.
standard.
Yeah, it works in this area where Ryan is.
see, but that's partly now why I'm leaning definitely toward it, because our general plan actually calls for us to not do development, and it would force the cities to annex in that annex declaration and come and take it and put it in their codes, because then you're talking about sewer lines and things like that we don't have to deal with. I mean, the sad reality is I know everybody wants to keep it nice, but the fact is, one home on 5 acres is part of our water problem. Alpine, one home on 1 acre, 67% of our culinary drinking water is dumped into our yards. I'm not talking the livestock, I'm talking our yards. And so, to me, I mean, it does open a can of worms, but at the same time, I'd like to force the cities, you know, it's part of this, and I understand why residents don't want to leave the county, because now you're paying more in taxes, but
And the other point I wanted to make and to speak to you is sitting on the Board of Adjustments, these citizens come into us because the county commission has said, why don't you go seek a variance? And they come down to us, and they get really frustrated at that point, obviously, because, you know, one body says, go here, and they come to us, and we don't have the flexibility to grant the variance, and so then they're even more upset. And so I think that's an issue that we gotta look at,
Well-
how to resolve, and I don't know how we resolve that with the state statute.
I think you
but I
can,
do
you
know
can
a
do it, because only
representative
we
would
can
get
appeal their
to fix
decision,
it.
right? The commission could appeal their decision if they granted a variance? Oh. Oh, okay.
So those are my comments, thanks.
Thank you. Any additional comment on this subject?
I got a question for Bryce or Brandon. Looking at the text amendment itself, is there any way that we could craft the text amendment so that it doesn't have the effects of what we're concerned about?
I think you could craft one that would address the road dedication. I think you could require maybe someone who wants to build on
Keep it as a private road?
a lot, well, they would have to go ahead and dedicate the portion that lies within their, in the prescribed right-of-way as part of the building permit process to build on a non-conforming lot of record. That wouldn't solve the challenge of a substandard lot. I mean, that's,
So he would not be able to still do anything?
so for example, say you have a three acre parcel and, you know, 10 feet of your deeded property lies within the prescribed right-of-way. Generally, that's within 28 feet of center line. You can have them dedicate that to the county to solve that issue. That's still, then all of a sudden it's a 2-point.
Hey, I got a change for you. What if we go ahead and we amend our RA5 and call it an RA 4.5?
That's, I mean,
That
that would be,
You could also provide an exception with regard to the 5-acre requirement to where if there's a historical history of it being 5 acres, as was represented here, I believe,
Right.
then
that
that
was
could be
actually gonna
factored
be my
into where
question.
if, because of survey adjustments or corrections, drops it down, but not less than 4.8 or something like that, then it could still be approved. You could build something like that right into the ordinance without a,
Well, but
across
that's
the
what I'm
board.
saying. The reason I throw out 4.5 is because some commissioner, some county employee in 1978 came up and said 5.
19.
Probably because we have 5 fingers. I mean, who knows, right? Like,
think-
it's such
I think
an
some of it-
arbitrary number.
Some of it ties into greenbelt
It
status.
ties into Greenbelt status.
With the
yeah,
text
our-
amendment that we
basis
have
for it.
on there right now, what could they go
Even
down
that
to
was
and still be
established by
non-conforming? I mean, how much,
random number.
how much land
The green
could
belt.
that, I mean, right now, we're talking about slivers.
Right.
You know, from 5 acres to 4.9.
Oh, I
But
see what
could they
you're
go
saying.
all the way to 2
Yeah,
and say,
Yeah.
okay, so that's
Yes.
where it really starts to get me nervous, because we've opened this whole thing up, wide open. Anybody with 2 acres, 1 acre, whatever, can come in and say,
I guess that would be an option. You could have a 10% or
But-
something, a
but
limit.
my question would be, is if we couldn't,
Percent's 4.5.
and if we couldn't look at a process for non-conforming lots within a range to either go to the Board of Appeals or to go through, an additional process to be granted that permission, if they fall within a window.
Yeah, you could probably utilize the conditional use process.
Right, so it would be something like that if it was crafted in that
Yeah.
manner.
I get it,
rather
it's
than
so
just
close.
Opening it wide up.
Yeah.
No offense, Bryce, but we finally get to hear Gary talk about real monuments in practical use now.
Well, Mr. Roberts was right and he was wrong. But the main thing that he was trying to get at is some sections of land, when they were originally surveyed, were smaller than 640 acres. By record, they were intended to be 640. So what happens is over years, as those small sections are divided up between, into several 20-acre parcels, for example, and then later on, those 20 acres are divided into several 5-acre pieces. Those 5-acre pieces then become the 4.8, 4.9. So I'm just sitting here thinking what would be a good solution to determine, this is for consideration, which pieces to give consideration to as far as that 5-acre is concerned. Most of the sections in the valley area here have been surveyed. We know the acreage involved. So in those sections of land that are short of the 640 acre original intended acreage as originally surveyed, rather than just arbitrarily just proportion something in, you could say, okay, say it's 635 acre section, you could basically say, okay, if you were to divide that 635 acres up into equal 5-acre pieces, and this is just arbitrary again, to a point, you could basically say, okay, property in this section, they can go down to 4 point, whatever that equates to be. If you understand what I'm saying here? Hold the 5 acres on the sections that are bigger than 640, but proportionally consider if that entire square mile section were divvied up into 5-acre pieces, what that would be. Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're looking for a solution, rather than just cut it off and say 4.8 or 4.9, what to consider, that seems to be an equitable solution.
Rob, question for you, and I know you've got comments, but if you'll also answer. Why can't somebody go and apply for a subdivision and then come to the commission and appeal our own code and we grant permission for a specific building lot?
That's a variance request, and that goes to the Board of Adjustment. Yeah.
Okay.
So, I think we're getting a little off field here. Is my understanding, and I'll let Bryce and Brandon correct me, my understanding on this particular issue, this particular case, it's 4.9 acres, the non-conforming lot of record is actually like 2.5 or something of that nature. This is going back to the historical lot. and it was increased to 4.9 acres, which is allowed to happen in our ordinance. The problem is, non-conforming lots of record are not recognized in the RA5 zone. And that was done on purpose by the county commission many, many years ago. They had a 3-year window to phase out non-conforming lots of record in the RA5 zone. And so that's really the issue here today. It's not about the curvature of the earth issue for this one. It's not about anything else. It's a 2.5 acre parcel that was expanded further,
Now,
but did not get expanded to 5 acres. And so the question before you is, do you want to allow non-conforming lots of record in the RA5 zone, and undo what a previous commission did back?
because we used to
in the
allow
80s?
them.
Used
See-
to allow music.
see, and
Well,
the
I don't
pro-
know if we've allowed them,
and the-
but we just didn't.
The problem
Allow for
is
3 years.
anytime the commission does it, the problem is we've got to be willing to open and look at what the trend is or where we're actually headed. And so for me, when we're talking about zoning is where's this county really lie? Or where does that specific area really lie? And that's why, to me, a non-conforming lot works in this situation here.
And it's your call.
But
And-
we're saying, if I'm understanding correctly though, that the non-conforming lots can be 2 acres, 3
In
acres?
this case, it was
Sure.
two
In the
point five,
RA5.
yes, because you remember, non-conforming lots of record, there was a period of time that the county allowed for 1 acre zone
Right,
too.
right.
So it could be an acre.
There's one
Right.
just-
And
And
that
quite
goes straight
honestly,
from
I
it.
know this will offend a great many people. I'm okay with that. I'm so okay with development of your land on however you want to do it.
And that's your call. I'll turn it back to Bryce to answer the questions and correct me if I'm incorrect on my understanding of this particular situation before you today.
I guess the only thing I'd add is maybe a compromise, if you will, would be to address non-conforming lots of record in every zone, allow maybe someone, because we have that problem that exists already of a minimum lot size of 50 acres in our CE1 zone, and someone's got 1 acre, and right now they could build on that. Perhaps we could, craft something in our non-conforming lot of record section that requires any non-conforming lot of record in any zone to be able to be built on as long as it's within 10% of the maximum acreage required. And you can even require them to dedicate the road too.
They could dedicate the road and have to come before the Board of Variance or something like that.
Or, we could do that
Yeah, but-
administratively too.
That creates a solution. that's-
But here's the other thing that we could do, Bryce, correct me if I'm wrong. So in this text amendment, J, non-conforming lot of records, 1, right? We have an A, B, and a C. The lot lies within this zone, the lot continuously. So if we move A, B, and C and make them B, C, and D, and make A say, provided the lot size is 4.75 acres or greater.
Well, I guess the challenge with that is, the CE1 zone, the minimum lot size is 50. So that's why I kind of think maybe just a percentage.
That's what I said, or greater.
Well, that would mean you can.
Now
have
we're
a
not
4
dealing with 2 acre, 3 acre lots.
But in the CE1 zone, which requires 50 acre lots, you're having a 4.5.
But we've already been down this battle. CE1 zones are placeholders, and depending on the size of where everything is, we've rezoned those to RA5. We've rezoned them. We've done different. We've put them into cities and put half-acre lots on them, on CE1 zones that existed in this county 10 years ago.
Well, and we have mining grazing too. We have
Right.
other zones that have, 20 acres, 50 acres, and so that's why I think maybe a percentage. That way, we're getting close to what that minimum lot size is, whether in the RA5 zone or the CE1
So
zone.
5%, meaning 4.75.
Yeah, 5, whatever. That way, we're addressing the issue of maybe having a super substandard lot in
Right.
a zone, and if you want to address the.
We have a lot of
dedication too.
employees that are hoping we finish this whole thing up
But
within 12 minutes.
what you say by that is that you're basically asking us to refer this back for more consideration.
I think you have the latitude to make that amendment at this meeting, or we can continue it for a week and craft something that kind of goes down that road. Because I think this section of the ordinance was open for discussion, and
Right.
so.
Well, I would like to remind the commission, just now that my memory's tied together on this, when we sent him away in May and June, we did tell him to go through that process and otherwise return to us so that we could take action.
Well, I'm not saying we don't take action, but I think deliberate action is appropriate for us to take.
So, Robert Morgan, County Attorney's Office, the least disruptive that would apply to less folks would be just to allow the RA5, allow non-conforming lots in the RA5 zone, and you could craft a minimum as you're talking about, right? So maybe allow for RA5, non-conforming lots of record in the RA5 zone, provided that such non-conforming lot is at least 4.5 acres.
Okay, so let me ask you this question
You could do that.
in the spirit of moving forward.
The next guy's in here at 4.4.
You might get that, yes.
So let me ask you this, is that something you guys could craft within a week and have it back on next week's agenda?
Yeah.
Okay,
Very,
then
very
in the
easy.
spirit of time, because I think that might be, rather than getting you a no vote today, I'm gonna move then that we can continue under that, allow Rob to do that and allow us time to research it a little more too. If that's okay with you guys.
And I'll second that, but it's not a no vote. I'm trying to find a way to
But
allow
no,
this
that's
to
what I said,
happen.
trying to make
I'm
him
trying
not
to say,
get a no
because it doesn't
vote.
make any sense to me
Right.
what the situation he's in, but then I can't swing the pendulum all the other way, the other
Right,
direction,
and that's why I
and be
say-
comfortable there.
And that's where we would be
Yeah.
because of a no vote, so that we're not hurting the county.
I would agree with that.
My only comment is as a staff, I'd like to maybe include all zones. I think that would, I think this is a
You
bigger
work
issue,
with
but
Robert,
we'll
you
bring two
guys put
options.
your own
So how
thing
long
up
would
there.
that take?
We
Is
can
that,
do that in.
you do that in a
five
week?
minutes. Yeah.
Okay,
Okay, then the motion.
I'll
Still
second
stand.
that motion.
Okay.
I have a motion and a second to continue regular agenda item number 5. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion will carry 3-0. Next, we'll look at adopting an ordinance amending the Utah County Vehicle Emissions Inspections Maintenance Program. Ben Vanoy is going to introduce the state mandated requirements for us.
Yes, thank you. As you're aware, House Bill 101, which was passed earlier this year, required counties that did not have a diesel emissions program, in other words, our county, to implement a 3-year pilot program
Targeting us?
requiring, the statute does say counties. Requiring an emissions inspection program for certain diesel-powered motor vehicles. We had a existing vehicle emissions program ordinance, so we took the opportunity to clean that up. So as you go through that, you'll notice some changes throughout. That's just us tidying it up. The big changes are, for example, on page 13, when it talks about exceptions in the 6.6 range, we amended that to conform with the statute. And our pilot program is at the very end in Appendix H. As you'll notice, if you go through that there certain vehicles require computerized inspection, other vehicles require visual inspection, so we've tailored that accordingly. We've also included other technical provisions that our staff felt was necessary for the proper implementation of this ordinance. That's why there might be a little bit more in our ordinance that's not in the statute, because we needed to flesh it out a little bit more.
That's the part that's concerning to me that I want to spend a little time actually
Sure.
talking to our expert up here. the chair.
Definitely.
Because I want to know his thoughts on it. He seems to know quite a bit about this issue. So-
Okay. Is there questions now, or want me to keep going? I have a,
Well,
You can keep going.
yeah,
Okay.
that's what I'm saying. That part of it's
Sure. As was discussed with, this has been on the agenda a couple times, and the reason for that is there is a discrepancy that our staff found in the state statute with the 1997 model vehicle year that Representative Arendt confirmed was a typo on their part. Unfortunately, it's been passed, and so the DMV stated to us that they're going to enforce this as it is, so we've amended the dates in here to reflect the dates in the
That
statute.
makes this very easy no vote, and I'll send it back to the state.
On that note, the DMV recommended we could implement a waiver program for those specific model vehicle years.
'Cause that was one of the key components of our negotiation
Yeah.
process when we were working through this for
Yeah.
me. And I will try and take it as an honest mistake, despite the fact that this whole thing was shoved down our throats by a Democrat who lives on the east bench of Salt Lake.
Right. So 1.15 in Appendix H is that allowance for a 1-year waiver for those vehicles upon certain conditions being met in order to compensate for that legislative typo. Appendix I is just including a paperless certificate of procedures, and Appendix J is in accordance with Senate Bill 80 regarding publicly owned vehicle emissions and the requirements therein. So we've copied those requirements to conform with Senate Bill 80. I think that's all. Oh, Appendix A through G, you'll note, is not has not been provided. We were trying to find the source document for that. We have found it. We would like to include it in the published ordinance. A through G don't get changed. We were just, it wasn't included in this document. We have found it. We would like those to be included, so it's a comprehensive ordinance. Any questions?
No, like to say, my question, knowing that Commissioner Ivy worked hard with this issue, is the changes that the county made, is it in conjunction with more or less where we should be?
I think one of my biggest concerns was section 2.0.
Appendix H?
It's the section dealing with the time frame.
Okay.
I don't understand why any vehicle dated pre-2006 has to have anything.
That's a good question.
And so if I just simply strike that and say any vehicle prior to 2006 does not require inspection, what happens?
We are in violation of state law.
Well, we've been in violation thus far. We don't have a policy.
Well, this House bill
So-
made it a violation.
Made a violation.
Yes, so if we don't implement the pilot program by January of 2019, January 1st.
Is there any penalties for violation?
That's a
I
legitimate
would have to get back
question.
to you on that.
Because I'll be blunt, there's a part of me that's fine with that.
You know where I'm going.
I do. This letter right here?
I normally want to comply.
Well, you said we got till January.
We do. The problem with that, as Scott could probably describe more adequately, is we need to let these mechanics be able to program.
right. But-
have sufficient time, which
So-
we're pushing it as it is
But-
with our timeframe.
There's rumor that there's gonna be a special session called, so if it's an honest mistake, let's fix the date and then we can fix ours, right?
We can hope for that, but that's no guarantee.
There's no guarantee in anything.
And he's gonna send out the notices that everybody has to have.
Yes.
And in general, to answer Commissioner Graves' question in reviewing this and knowing your work on it, I'm generally okay with it, with the exception of the provision of the date on older vehicles. That was the only thing that rubs me, but I don't know what we do to fix that.
So I guess the thing is, Ben, I'd like to sit on this for just a couple weeks, knowing that if that's the case, the ordinance itself, we can prep and get ready for everything while we work on a date issue to find out
And I
for a
don't,
legal opinion on.
I don't know. Yeah, go for it. Talk to me about it.
We have a policy already that technicians that are certified in the last quarter of the year don't need to certify in the next upcoming year. They're automatically
We have
roll
an
over.
October 1 deadline.
Yeah, so anybody in October, November, and December that gets certified through our program would then be automatically certified in 2019. We're trying to set that date of January 1st. Everybody has to be trained and updated.
Okay.
And anybody that gets certified in those last 3 months won't have to then meet the requirements until the following year. And we don't want to have some people that are certified to do diesels and some people that are
So
not.
can we wait, if we just wait 1 week then, because I would like to know the penalty for amending the time.
We'll probably have to wait at least 2 weeks, right? So you can be here.
I'll be here on the phone. so it'll be
Oh,
there.
well, I'm just saying, what,
I-
before the end of September,
There-
I'd like to know the answer on that penalty question.
Mine,
Because if we can do it with 2006, let's do it, right?
but there's a little bit of push in me that wants to just amend that to be 2006 mirror and drop the 97 date and move.
Pass it with that in there.
As legal
I'll
counsel,
give-
I would advise against that.
I know you.
Well, I
know
often
you-
ignore our
I-
attorneys.
I
I'll
know
give you that
advise
motion, Mr.
against
Chair.
that. And my thought is you guys don't have anything else to do, right?
If you want that motion, I'm more than inclined to give you a motion right now.
It's your call. I can, if we continue this a week, I can look at research as to.
Hey, you're gonna have to
what these-
research it anyway if we pass it this way.
Yes, I will. Again, if there's work on your end that can be done at the legislative level, in terms of speaking with Representative Laurent, that could be favorable for us.
It's not him that's gonna help.
So Representative Arendt she's going to be the one that, she sent us an email. Weren't you copied on that email?
I was.
And I'm sorry, my memory doesn't recall specifically what was stated there.
We pointed out the discrepancy. She said, thank you for your message. I was the chief sponsor. This is to Steve and Scott and myself and you.
Right.
It looks like there may have been a drafting error that no one caught, but I'd like to run it past the drafting attorney. I'll get back to you. That drafting attorney.
Yeah.
I think we're good, Ben.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll move then that we adopt an ordinance amending the Utah County Vehicle Emissions Inspection in number 6 with the amendment of the time change to the year 2006.
Specifically in.
Anywhere it mentions 1997.
Okay.
Section.
Yeah. So that would effectively eliminate the entire visual inspection requirement. That's for the vehicles
For
from 97
vehicles.
to 2006.
Yep.
For vehicles older than 2006.
Yep, I'm seconding that.
I have a motion and a second to adopt regular agenda item number 6 with the noted change. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion will carry 3-0.
Have fun, Ben.
Thanks.
Good news, we got lunch for you in a few minutes.
All right, we will now look at setting our closed meetings. We have a need for 7, 9, and 10. I don't know who's doing this.
Let me get there. 7, 9, and 10, make a motion that we strike number 8 on our regular agenda.
Second.
Motion and a second, strike regular agenda item number 8. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Motion will carry 3-0.
Make a motion we approve and set a date, time, and location for a closed meeting for a strategy session to discuss the purchase, exchange, or lease of real property, water rights, or water shares at today's date at this location following the completion of our regular agenda.
Second.
I have a motion and a second to approve regular agenda item number 7. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Motion will carry 3-0.
Make a motion that we approve and set a date, time, and location for a closed meeting to discuss the character, professional competence, or physical or mental health of an individual or individuals at today's date at this location following the completion of our regular agenda.
Second.
I have a motion and a second to approve regular agenda item number 9. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion will carry 3-0.
Make a motion that we approve and set a date, time, and location for a closed meeting for a strategy session to discuss the pending or reasonable imminent litigation at today's date following the completion of following the completion of our regular agenda.
Second.
Motion and a second to approve regular.
Stopped on the up.
Regular agenda item number 10. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Apparently, we're all thinking about food and not.
By the way, for those watching the stream, we're supposed to serve it. That's the hurry.
We've already completed our work session. Is there any general public comment? Seeing none, we'll go ahead and move into our closed session.
Well, they must be helping us.